The year was 1943. The relentless sun beat down on the airfields scattered across the Solomon Islands, turning the corrugated iron hangars into ovens and baking the dust into a fine, choking powder. From these sweltering strips, the sleek, twin-boomed P-38 Lightning fighters, affectionately dubbed fork-tailed devils by the Americans, and two planes, one pilot by the Japanese, soared into the vast, unforgiving skies of the Pacific. Their mission, to wrest air superiority from the highly experienced and tenacious pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, flying their legendary A6M0 fighters. On paper, the P-38 was a marvel of engineering. With two powerful Allison engines, it was faster, boasted a higher service ceiling, and packed a concentrated punch of .450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon in its nose. It was designed for high-altitude interception and swift, devastating attacks, seemingly an untouchable predator. Yet, despite these advantages, the pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron, based on Guadalcanal, knew a grim truth. In the swirling, acrobatic ballet of a low-altitude dogfight, the P-38 was often a lumbering giant, stiff and unresponsive, a sitting duck for the nimble, quick-turning Zero. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This unexpected Achilles heel was a bitter pill for pilots like Captain Thomas Torch Mallory. A seasoned veteran of countless engagements, Mallory knew the P-38 inside and out. He understood its strengths, the blistering speed in a dive, the ability to climb away from trouble, the devastating firepower that could shred a Zero in a single burst. But he also knew its fatal flaw. At high speeds, particularly during aggressive maneuvering, the P-38's control surfaces, especially the ailerons, would stiffen dramatically. It felt, as he often described it, like trying to steer a truck with a frozen steering wheel. This phenomenon, known as compressibility, wasn't just a nuisance, it was a killer. As the P-38 neared its critical Mach number, often in high-speed dives or tight turns, pockets of supersonic airflow would form over the wings, disrupting the smooth air pressure over the control surfaces. The result was a dramatic increase in stick force, making it almost impossible for pilots to command their aircraft effectively. The P-38, designed for speed, became paradoxically less controllable when pushed to its limits. The Japanese Zero, by contrast, was built for agility. Lighter, with a larger wing area and lower wing loading, it could turn on a dime, especially at lower altitudes and speeds. While slower in a straight line and lacking the P-38's armor protection, the Zero's phenomenal maneuverability allowed its pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. They would wait for the P-38 to make its high-speed pass, then, with an almost supernatural agility, snap their aircraft around, getting on the Lightning's tail before the American pilot could even complete his turn. Mallory had witnessed it too many times. A P-38 pilot attempting to follow a Zero in a tight turn, finding his controls locked, his aircraft refusing to respond, then seeing the glint of a machine gun as tracers ripped into his wing. It was infuriating. They had the faster, more heavily armed plane, but in the close-quarters dance of a dogfight, pure speed and firepower weren't enough. Maneuverability was king, and in that arena, the P-38 was a peasant. Colonel Arthur Harrison, commander of the 339th, felt the pressure acutely. His squadron was losing good men, not because of pilot incompetence or lack of bravery, but because of an inherent design limitation that seemed insurmountable. He'd sent countless reports back to Lockheed and Army Air Forces Command, detailing the P-38's high-speed control issues, but the answers were always the same. Known phenomenon, engineers are working on it, adjust tactics. But adjust tactics meant avoiding the very situations where their superior speed might put them in a dominant position. It meant sacrificing the P-38's full potential, allowing the enemy to dictate the terms of battle. Harrison admired the P-38. It was a beautiful, powerful machine, a symbol of American ingenuity. But its current limitations were turning that symbol into a liability in certain crucial combat scenarios. The pilots were growing despondent, their confidence in their aircraft eroding with each lost engagement. They had a devil in their hands, But sometimes it felt like it was the devil himself who was pulling the strings, not the pilot. This narrative will delve into how, through the ingenuity of one man and a deceptively simple solution, the P-38 Lightning was fundamentally transformed, allowing it to finally unleash its full potential and truly dominate the Pacific skies, altering the course of the air war and challenging conventional engineering wisdom forever. The transformation was coming, and it would redefine what was thought possible in the crucible of combat. The technical reports piled up on Dr. Elias Vance's desk at Lockheed's Skunk Works facility in Burbank, California, each one a testament to the persistent problem plaguing the P-38 Lightning. Vance, a civilian aerodynamicist with a mind that danced between meticulous calculations and audacious leaps of intuition, wasn't your typical engineer. While his colleagues favored slide rules and wind tunnels, Vance often found himself sketching complex airflow patterns on napkins, his wire-rimmed glasses pushed up his nose, lost in thought. He had a reputation for being brilliant, if a little eccentric, preferring the quiet hum of the workshop to the bureaucratic din of meetings. The problem of the P-38's high-speed compressibility was a national priority, and the best minds at Lockheed were throwing every complex solution they could conceive at it. Vance, however, found himself increasingly skeptical of their approaches. The official reports detailed the P-38's specific aerodynamic issues, at speeds exceeding approximately Mach 0. 68, particularly in dives or high-G maneuvers, the unique laminar flow wing profile, designed for maximum speed and efficiency, began to encounter shock waves. These shock waves caused the airflow over the wing's control surfaces, especially the ailerons, to separate prematurely. This separation led to a drastic reduction in the effectiveness of the ailerons, making the stick feel incredibly heavy and unresponsive. Pilots reported needing immense force to move the stick, often to no avail. The aircraft simply wouldn't respond with the agility required in a dogfight. Lockheed's initial attempts to solve this were highly elaborate. Engineers proposed strengthening the aileron structures, believing the stiffness was due to structural flexing. They experimented with different airfoil shapes, micro slats, and even complex hydraulic boost systems, similar to power steering in a car, to assist the pilot in moving the controls. Each of these solutions was costly, time-consuming, and required significant redesigns, often adding weight and complexity to an already sophisticated aircraft. None of them, however, truly addressed the fundamental aerodynamic issue in a simple, elegant way. Vance watched these efforts with a growing sense of unease. He felt they were trying to overpower the problem with brute force or elaborate systems, rather than understanding its root cause in a new light. He spent hours poring over pilot debriefs, focusing not just on the technical descriptions of control stiffness, but on the feel of the aircraft described by the pilots. Like steering through molasses, the stick just wouldn't budge. It felt like the wings were fighting me. These anecdotal descriptions, often dismissed by more rigid engineers, painted a vivid picture for Vance. He realized the issue wasn't just about the physical force required to move the stick, but about the feedback and the response of the aircraft. The pilot wasn't just fighting the air. He was fighting a system that gave him no aerodynamic leverage. His own research focused on the minute pressure differentials at the trailing edge of the wing and the ailerons at transonic speeds. He built small, intricate models, not for a wind tunnel, but for a specialized water tunnel where he could visualize fluid dynamics in slow motion, using dyes to track flow separation. What he observed confirmed his hypothesis. The shockwave-induced airflow separation wasn't just making the ailerons heavy, it was effectively rendering them aerodynamically stalled at critical moments. A hydraulic boost might help the pilot move the stick, but if the control surface itself wasn't generating the necessary aerodynamic force, the aircraft still wouldn't respond as desired. The engineers were trying to put a bigger engine on a car with flat tires. What was needed was a way to restore the aerodynamic authority of the ailerons, or at least provide an assist that worked with the airflow, not against it. Vance was convinced that a simpler, more elegant solution lay hidden beneath layers of complex calculations and assumptions. He began to think outside the traditional box, imagining not a massive overhaul but a subtle, almost imperceptible adjustment that could shift the aerodynamic balance just enough to make a profound difference. His colleagues, engrossed in their CAD drawings and intricate hydraulic schematics, paid him little mind, dismissing his quiet tinkering as just another one of Dr. Vance's esoteric side projects. They didn't realize that in his secluded corner of the workshop, Vance was on the verge of a breakthrough that would redefine the P-38's combat effectiveness. The spark of insight for Dr. Elias Vance didn't come from a complex equation or a cutting-edge wind tunnel test. It arrived unexpectedly during a lunch break as he idly watched a pigeon preen its feathers, noticing how the bird subtly adjusted individual barbules to control its flight. It was an analogy, perhaps, to how small, seemingly insignificant changes could have a profound impact on an aerodynamic surface. He returned to his workshop, his mind alight with a new direction. The existing solutions were all about brute force, bigger hydraulics, stronger structures, different wing shapes. Vance, however, began to think about feedback and aerodynamic leverage. What if, instead of fighting the airflow, they could harness a small part of it to assist the pilot? His idea was shockingly simple, so simple that it was almost embarrassing to propose. He envisioned a small spring-loaded trim tab attached to the trailing edge of each aileron. This wasn't a novel concept. Trim tabs existed for pilots to fine-tune control forces. But Vance's innovation was the automatic passive activation of this trim tab, linked directly to the stick input, but with a twist. His stupid wire trick involved a small, strategically placed cable or wire connected from the P-38's main control stick mechanism to a small lever that would subtly deflect this mini-trim tab. As the pilot moved the stick, particularly at high speeds when the main ailerons were stiffening, this wire would automatically and proportionally deflect the trim tab in the opposite direction of the main aileron movement. Here's how it worked. When the pilot pushed the stick to the right, attempting to move the right aileron down and the left aileron up for a right roll, the wire mechanism would simultaneously cause a small automatic trim tab on the right aileron to deflect upwards and on the left aileron to deflect downwards. This counter-deflection, though small, created a localized aerodynamic force that acted like a tiny power assist or an aerodynamic servo for the main aileron. It created a small, continuous control moment that helped overcome the increasing stiffness of the main aileron, effectively reducing the physical stick force required by the pilot to achieve a given aileron deflection. It wasn't adding hydraulic power, it was using the existing airflow to create a self-correcting force-reducing lever. It was, in essence, an automatic, aerodynamically driven balance tab, but engineered with a minimal mechanical linkage that required no complex hydraulics, no additional power source, and virtually no extra weight. When Vance tentatively presented his concept to a small group of Lockheed engineers and a skeptical Colonel Harrison, he was met with a mixture of polite bewilderment and outright derision. A wire? Dr. Vance, are you suggesting that a piece of glorified piano wire is going to fix a problem that has eluded our best aerodynamicists for months, with millions of dollars invested in hydraulic systems and redesigns? Scoffed one senior engineer, Dr. Hammond, known for his adherence to traditional complex engineering solutions. Hammond had been leading the effort for a new hydraulic booster system, a project he had personally championed. Colonel Harrison, ever pragmatic, raised an eyebrow. Dr. Vance, with all due respect, my pilots are dying because they can't turn their aircraft. You're proposing a string and a flap? We've tried everything from thicker skins to redesigned fuselages. This seems rudimentary. Vance, usually quiet, became animated. Colonel Dr. Hammond, the problem isn't just about forcing the aileron to move, it's about making the aileron effective again at high speeds. My system doesn't force the aileron, it helps the airflow assist the aileron. It's about leveraging the very forces that cause the problem. Think of it not as a string, but as an elegant passive aerodynamic counterweight, providing crucial feedback and reducing pilot workload. It's low-tech, yes, but it addresses the aerodynamic principle directly, not just the symptom of stick force. His impassioned plea did little to sway them. The consensus was clear. It was too simple, too cheap, too unconventional to possibly work. The prevailing wisdom dictated that complex problems demanded complex solutions. Vance's stupid wire trick was deemed beneath serious consideration, an embarrassing distraction from the real engineering efforts underway. Undeterred, Vance retreated to his workshop, more determined than ever to prove his hypothesis. He knew that sometimes the most profound solutions lay hidden in plain sight, waiting for an unconventional mind to uncover them. The institutional resistance to Dr. Elias Vance's stupid wire trick was almost palpable. Colonel Arthur Harrison, despite his respect for Vance's intellect, couldn't risk his squadron's precious P-38s or the lives of his pilots on what seemed like a whimsical, unproven gadget. Dr. Hammond, the lead for the hydraulic boost project, saw Vance's idea not as a solution, but as a direct threat to his own reputation and the validity of his multi-million-dollar program. Vance was repeatedly denied official access to test aircraft, wind tunnel time, and even basic fabrication resources for his rudimentary modification. He found himself increasingly isolated, working late into the nights, scrounging parts from the boneyard, and using his own limited funds to build a full-scale mock-up of his aileron and trim tab assembly. This defiance, however, caught the attention of a young, forward-thinking Lockheed test pilot, Captain Jack Jester Reynolds. Reynolds had been one of the most vocal critics of the P-38's high-speed handling, having nearly lost his life twice due to control lockup during test dives. He was desperate for a solution, and having heard rumors of Vance's unconventional approach, sought him out. "Dr. Vance," Reynolds began, finding the engineer hunched over a workbench, meticulously polishing a small metal lever. "They say you've got a crazy idea for the Lightning. Crazy enough to work?" Reynolds' willingness to listen, and more importantly to fly with the modification, was the breakthrough Vance desperately needed. Secretly, and without official sanction, they rigged a stripped-down P-38 testbed, one slated for decommissioning, with Vance's prototype wire and trim tab system. The installation was deceptively simple, requiring only minor structural changes to the aileron and a careful routing of the control wire. The stakes were incredibly high. If they failed, Vance would likely face court-martial for insubordination, and Reynolds would be grounded, his career over. If they succeeded, however, the implications were enormous. The test flight day was a humid, overcast morning. Vance, heart-pounding, watched from the deserted tarmac as Reynolds climbed into the cockpit. Colonel Harrison, having been tipped off by a nervous junior engineer, arrived unannounced, his face a mask of stern disapproval, but a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Dr. Hammond also appeared, openly mocking the backyard engineering. Reynolds took off, the P-38's engines roaring. He flew a series of standard maneuvers, getting a feel for the unmodified aircraft at various speeds. Then, with a curt radio acknowledgement, he engaged the Vance modification. He put the P-38 into a steep, high-speed dive, simulating the conditions where control stiffness was most pronounced. On the ground, Harrison gripped his binoculars, his jaw tight. Hammond smirked, ready to witness the inevitable failure. But then, something astonishing happened. Instead of the expected struggle, the P-38, at over 400 miles per hour, executed a tight, controlled roll. Reynolds pulled out of the dive smoothly, then immediately initiated another high-speed turn, faster and tighter than Harrison had ever seen a stock P-38 perform at that speed. The aircraft responded with an agility that defied all previous experience. Over the radio, Reynolds' voice crackled. "Colonel, are you seeing this? It's like a different plane. The stick isn't heavy. I can actually feel the controls. It's responsive." Harrison lowered his binoculars, his expression shifting from disapproval to stunned amazement. Hammond's jaw dropped. The data from the telemetry, projected onto a makeshift screen in Vance's small workshop, confirmed Reynolds' ecstatic reports. Stick forces at high speeds were reduced by over 60%, and the aircraft's roll rate had significantly improved without any loss of stability. The P-38, once stiff and unpredictable at speed, had been transformed into a responsive, agile fighter. The stupid wire trick was, in fact, a stroke of genius. The shocking revelation wasn't just that it worked, but how well it worked. Its simplicity was its strength, not its weakness. It was a clear, unambiguous victory for unconventional thinking, a direct rebuke to the ingrained belief that only complex problems could yield complex, costly solutions. Harrison, after seeing the data and hearing Reynolds's passionate debrief, put his hand on Vance's shoulder. "Dr. Vance," he said, a rare smile breaking across his face, "it seems I owe you an apology, and perhaps the Imperial Japanese Navy is about to owe you a lot more than that." The implications for the air war in the Pacific were suddenly exhilaratingly clear. The news of Dr. Vance's stupid wire trick spread like wildfire through the Lockheed plant, quickly reaching the highest echelons of the Army Air Forces. Colonel Harrison, now a staunch advocate, personally championed its immediate implementation. The modification was officially designated the Vance Control Assist and was prioritized for rapid deployment to the Pacific Theater. Given its mechanical simplicity, it could be fabricated and installed by ground crews in the field, turning what would typically be a months-long overhaul into a matter of days per aircraft. Within weeks, modified P-38s began arriving at forward airfields, indistinguishable from their predecessors, save for a small internal adjustment. Captain Thomas Mallory was among the first pilots to receive a modified P-38. He approached the aircraft with a mixture of hope and skepticism. He'd seen countless fixes and improvements come and go, none of them truly addressing the fundamental issue. As he taxied out for his first combat patrol, he still felt the familiar apprehension of confronting Zeros. His wingman for the mission was Lieutenant Jim "Jinx" Kelly, a younger pilot who had recently arrived in the squadron, struggling to adapt to the P-38's quirks and the brutal realities of Pacific air combat. "Just try not to get outturned, Jinx," Mallory advised over the radio, the usual pre-combat tension evident in his voice. "Stick with the boom and zoom." Their patrol took them over the dense jungles of New Georgia. Suddenly, the radio crackled with reports of inbound bogies. A flight of 6 Zeros, led by the formidable Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, known for his aggressive tactics and uncanny ability to predict American maneuvers. The engagement began as many others had. The P-38s made a high-speed pass, tearing through the Japanese formation. But as Mallory attempted to turn back into the fight, instead of the crushing, immovable stick he expected, he felt a remarkable lightness, a responsiveness that allowed him to tighten his turn radius significantly. He could actually pull the P-38 around, adjusting his aim with unprecedented precision. He latched onto the tail of a Zero that had peeled off to evade Jinx, a target he would have struggled to acquire before. A burst from his cannons sent the Zero spiraling earthward in flames. Jinx, struggling with a Zero on his own tail, was about to break off, bracing for the inevitable. But then he saw Mallory's P-38, instead of extending away, execute a sharp, almost impossible turn, cutting off the pursuing Zero and forcing it to brake hard. "Holy cow, Torch, what was that?" Jinx yelled, adrenaline coursing through him. Mallory, exhilarated, replied, "It's the new setup, Jinx. The damn wire works. Stick with me." In that single engagement, the difference was stark. 2 Zeros were shot down, 2 more damaged, and all P-38s returned. Mallory's confidence, which had been slowly eroding with each frustrating dogfight, soared. He found himself actively seeking out turning engagements, no longer fearing the Zero's agility. The boom and zoom tactic, while still effective, was no longer their only option. They could now dogfight. The transformation wasn't just individual, it was systemic. Within weeks, the kill ratios began to shift dramatically. The 339th Fighter Squadron, once plagued by losses, saw its combat effectiveness skyrocket. Pilots, who had previously dreaded close-quarters combat with Zeros, now flew with a renewed sense of aggression and confidence. The psychological impact was profound. American pilots, initially told to avoid sustained turns with Zeros, were now finding they could not only hold their own but often outturn the Japanese fighters at higher speeds. This wasn't just about a mechanical advantage, it was about reclaiming the mental edge, the belief in their machines, and their own capabilities. The Vance Control Assist had not just improved the P-38. It had changed the very nature of air combat for the American pilots in the Pacific, giving them a tangible advantage that would soon be felt across the entire theater. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, a pilot whose reputation as a skilled and daring ace preceded him, was growing increasingly disturbed. He had carved out his legend in the skies over the Solomon Islands. His Mitsubishi A6M0, a nimble extension of his will. He knew the strengths and weaknesses of every Allied aircraft. The P-38 Lightning, the fork-tailed devil, was fast and powerful, a formidable threat in a diving attack or a straight-line chase. But in the close-in dance of a dogfight, Tanaka knew he held the advantage. He could consistently outturn them, get on their tails, and bring his machine guns and cannons to bear. It was a predictable pattern, one he had exploited to devastating effect. But lately, something had changed. Tanaka first noticed it during an escort mission for a Japanese bomber formation over Bougainville. A flight of P-38s had intercepted them. As usual, the Lightnings initiated their high-speed passes, but this time, when Tanaka made his characteristic tight turn to get behind a P-38 attempting to follow him, the American aircraft didn't just extend away in a straight line as expected. Instead, the P-38, flown by Captain Mallory, responded with a sudden, sharp jink, pulling into a surprisingly tight turn that almost matched Tanaka's own. Tanaka, momentarily caught off guard, had to brake hard to avoid a collision. He couldn't believe his eyes. "That Lightning, it turned," he muttered to his wingman, disbelief coloring his voice. "It used to be a bullet in a straight line, but now it turns like a hawk." This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next few weeks, reports began filtering back through Japanese intelligence channels. P-38s, particularly those encountered in crucial engagements, were exhibiting unprecedented agility. Pilots who had previously reported easy victories over Lightnings in turning engagements were now finding themselves in desperate struggles, often losing their own aircraft. The P-38s were no longer just making a single, predictable pass. They were re-engaging, turning sharply, and exploiting their superior speed and firepower to devastating effect. The old tactics of waiting for the P-38 to commit, then outmaneuvering it, were suddenly far less effective, sometimes even suicidal. Japanese commanders, initially dismissing these reports as pilot exaggeration or American propaganda, began to take notice as their losses mounted. They theorized new American pilot training programs, perhaps even a new variant of the P-38. Reconnaissance flights were ordered to photograph Allied airfields, looking for any visible modifications to the P-38s. Japanese engineers scrutinized salvaged P-38 wreckage, searching for hidden hydraulic systems or radical changes to the wing, but they found nothing. The external appearance of the P-38s remained unchanged. The Vance Control Assist was an internal, subtle modification, completely invisible to the naked eye. This secrecy further amplified the psychological impact. The unknown was always more frightening. Japanese pilots began to question their long-held belief in the Zero's unassailable maneuverability. The confidence that had once been their greatest weapon began to waver. For Tanaka, the shift was deeply personal. He had always taken pride in his aircraft's superior agility, a source of spiritual and tactical strength. Now, facing these new Lightnings, he felt a creeping unease. He witnessed firsthand how Captain Mallory, who he recognized from previous engagements, was now pressing the fight with an almost reckless confidence, his P-38 executing maneuvers that should have been impossible. In one brutal skirmish, Tanaka himself narrowly escaped a relentless P-38 after it maintained a turning fight for far longer than he thought possible, forcing him into a low-altitude dive he barely recovered from. The advantage of surprise, the confidence in his aircraft's inherent superiority, was eroding. The P-38, once a predictable opponent, had become a ghost. Its transformation was unseen, yet profoundly felt in every twisting, turning aerial combat above the Pacific, slowly but surely turning the tide in favor of the Allied pilots. The unseen shift in P-38 performance had a profound and rapid impact on the broader Pacific Air War. No longer constrained by the fear of high-speed control lockup, American P-38 pilots, armed with the Vance Control Assist, unleashed the full potential of their aircraft. The kill ratios soared dramatically, reversing a troubling trend that had seen many early P-38 pilots falling prey to the nimble Zero. Before the modification, the P-38 to Zero kill ratio was often around 1. 5, 1 to 2, 1 in favor of the P-38, but with many P-38s lost in close-in maneuvering. After the modification, this ratio quickly climbed to over 5:1, and in some squadrons even higher, with significantly fewer P-38 losses. The fork-tailed Devil finally lived up to its aggressive moniker. This newfound agility allowed P-38s to perform their bomber escort duties with unprecedented effectiveness. Previously, when Zeros would engage bombers, P-38s had to rely on hit-and-run tactics, unable to maintain close protection if the fight dragged into a turn. Now they could stay with the bombers, fighting off Japanese interceptors in sustained engagements, ensuring their charges reached their targets. The infamous raids on Rabaul, a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold, saw the modified P-38s playing a crucial role, their enhanced maneuverability allowing them to clear the skies of Zeros, protecting vulnerable bombers, and greatly increasing the success rate of these vital missions. In the crucial island-hopping campaigns, from the Solomons to New Guinea, P-38s provided dominant air cover, effectively neutralizing Japanese air superiority in many key sectors. Colonel Arthur Harrison, now a brigadier general, watched with pride as his squadrons, once plagued by low morale and frustrating losses, became the spearhead of Allied air power. He often reflected on his initial skepticism of Dr. Vance's simple wire. He had been so entrenched in the belief that complex problems required complex solutions, almost dismissing the engineer out of hand. Now he often recounted the story to his staff, emphasizing the critical importance of listening to unconventional ideas, no matter how simple they seemed. Never underestimate the power of ingenuity, he'd often say, and never assume that the most complex solution is the best one. General Harrison personally ensured that Dr. Vance received proper recognition, not just within Lockheed, but from the Army Air Forces. Vance, still preferring his quiet work to public accolades, reluctantly accepted a Presidential Medal of Freedom, largely due to Harrison's insistence. Vance, however, found his true satisfaction in the combat reports, in the stories of pilots who returned safely, their lives saved by his ingenious yet humble modification. He read through Captain Mallory's debriefs with particular interest, noting Mallory's transformation from a cautious boom and zoom pilot to an aggressive dogfighter, praising the P-38's new responsiveness. Vance wasn't a soldier, but he understood the immense human cost of war, and knowing his work had directly saved lives was a reward far greater than any medal. On the Japanese side, Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka and his fellow Zero pilots continued to struggle with the perplexing shift. Their command, still baffled by the P-38's unexpected agility, issued new directives: avoid sustained turning engagements with the Lightnings, focus on ambush tactics, and prioritize targets of opportunity. But these directives were often difficult to follow in the chaos of a dogfight. Tanaka himself was forced to adopt a more cautious approach, his aggressive spirit tempered by the P-38's newfound capabilities. He survived the war, a living testament to the P-38's transformation, forever haunted by the memory of the fork-tailed devils that suddenly learned to dance. The tide of the air war in the Pacific was turning, not with a roar of new engines or the unveiling of a superweapon, but with the quiet hum of a simple, elegantly placed wire, a testament to the power of a single idea in the crucible of war. The war in the Pacific eventually concluded, leaving behind a landscape forever altered by the ingenuity, sacrifice, and unexpected twists of fate. For the individuals involved in the P-38's transformation, the post-war years brought varied paths, each shaped by the conflict and the profound impact of the stupid wire trick. Dr. Elias Vance, the quiet engineer whose brilliance had reshaped aerial combat, remained at Lockheed, though his focus shifted to the nascent field of jet propulsion. His experience with the P-38's control assist cemented his reputation as a visionary, known for finding elegant, often counterintuitive solutions to complex aerodynamic problems. He became a respected, almost mythical figure in engineering circles, frequently consulted on high-priority projects. Vance, however, never lost his humility, often reminding younger engineers that sometimes the most sophisticated answer lay not in added complexity, but in distilled simplicity. He found immense satisfaction in teaching and mentoring, instilling in the next generation a spirit of critical thinking and a willingness to challenge established norms. He eventually retired to a secluded home, continuing to tinker with inventions, but always carrying the quiet pride of lives saved by his almost invisible contribution. Captain Thomas Torch Mallory, having survived the war with an exemplary combat record, initially struggled to adjust to civilian life. The intensity of aerial combat left an indelible mark. He eventually found a calling as a test pilot for a burgeoning civilian aviation company, his first-hand experience with the P-38's transformation making him an invaluable asset in evaluating new aircraft designs. He became a passionate advocate for closer collaboration between pilots and engineers, often sharing the story of Vance's wire as a powerful example of how pilot feedback and an engineer's keen insight could combine to achieve miracles. Mallory's confidence, once buoyed by the modified P-38, never left him. Colonel Arthur Harrison rose through the ranks, eventually retiring as a highly decorated general. His leadership throughout the Pacific Campaign and his decisive action in backing Vance's modification cemented his legacy. In his memoirs, he dedicated a significant section to the Vance Revelation, using it as a case study for the importance of intellectual humility in military leadership. He emphasized that the greatest innovations often come from unexpected places and that true leaders must be willing to challenge their own assumptions. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, like many Japanese veterans, returned to a shattered homeland. He rebuilt his life, becoming a successful businessman. He rarely spoke of the war, but the memory of the transformed P-38s haunted him. Years later, he learned the secret of the P-38's modification through a historical documentary, A Simple Wire. The revelation brought a strange mix of astonishment and a grudging respect for the ingenuity of his former enemies. He often wondered about the engineer behind it, a silent architect of his greatest combat challenges. The Vance Control Assist, though a simple mechanical device, profoundly influenced subsequent aircraft design. It highlighted the critical importance of control harmony and pilot workload reduction at high speeds, paving the way for more sophisticated but often heavier hydraulic and fly-by-wire systems. The lesson, however, was clear. Minor, elegant aerodynamic tweaks could yield massive dividends in performance and pilot confidence. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin booms and distinctive silhouette, became a legend in its own right, its wartime triumphs often attributed to its speed and firepower. But the hidden truth, the unspoken hero, was the simple wire that transformed it from a powerful but often unwieldy machine into a truly dominant force in the Pacific skies, saving countless lives and fundamentally altering the trajectory of the war. Its legacy wasn't just in the planes it improved, but in the enduring principle it proved, that sometimes the most profound solutions are found not in the complex, but in the elegantly simple. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.